You've made it to Chirohustle. Sit back and learn from the greatest influencers in the profession on the world's #1 chiropractic podcast. Before we dive into this powerful episode, please remember to subscribe to our channels and to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes and to continue hustling. This episode is sponsored by Imaging Services, Chiro Health USA, Chiro Moguls, Pure Chiro Notes, Titronics, Sherman College of Chiropractic, New Patients in a Box, the Influencer Authority Podcast Training, Mango Voice, Community Healthcare Resources, Life Chiropractic College West. Let's hustle.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 406 of the Chirohustle podcast. I'm your producer, Luke Millette, and here's your host, James Chester.
So today we have the opportunity of interviewing Guerry Grune. And if you want to hear about patents, products, and becoming an educator, stay tuned. Welcome back. This is another episode of the Chirohustle podcast. It's episode 406, and I have Guerry Grune here with me. This guy is so impressive. I'm ready for him to tell the story of his career and what he's up to. But before we do that, I'm going to let you guys know the big why. Why do we do what we do over here at Chirohustle? Well, we protect freedom of speech. I think that that's super essential, especially today and after what we've gone through over the past couple of years. And we protect the sacred trust. BJ Palmer Sacred Trust. If you do not know what that means, go and do a quick search for BJ Palmer Sacred Trust. You're going to have a big eye-opener as to what this chiropractic profession really stands for. And then we support subluxation-based chiropractic. That's another big word. Go and search for that too. Find out what subluxation means. It will mean something different to each person, because when you get a subluxation corrected, the next thing stands up to that is innate intelligence and universal intelligence. And that when somebody gets a subluxation corrected, it connects man or woman, the physical, to man or woman, the spiritual. And with that being said, episode 406, welcome to the show, Guerry.
Thanks for having me, James.
Yeah, man. We were just like on fire off camera. I'm like, we better get this thing going.
We're going to run out of time before we even start.
Yeah, I was reading your bio. Super impressive. I almost ran out of my highlighter on it. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is you've been at chemical warfare with the endocrine system, and you've created a product line to support that.
All true. All true. So we'll start there.
But you do patents.
I do patent work. Yeah.
You protect people through intellectual property.
I do.
You got 4 degrees.
And
you like to surf.
Yeah, I'm a nerd surfer.
So let's first jump into this consistent affair with learning about how you can support the endocrine system with your products.
Sure. So the endocrine system, for anybody who doesn't realize what it is, it's basically all your organs, and the endocrine system is basically how your organs receive and then get rid of toxins. They may not receive toxins at all, but they're always getting rid of it. So your lungs, your kidneys, any one of your organs, actually, bladder, these all are set up in your system so that what happens is they will remove toxins. Liver, of course, is your #1 and largest internal organ. Your skin is your largest organ. And so what happened was I got involved with endocrine disruptors because of sunscreen. So in 2001, a woman named Margaret Schlumpf at the University of Zurich in Switzerland, who's a toxicologist, came up with a study which sort of shocked everybody at the time. And I'm a chemist and chemical engineer, so I get the ACS weekly journal, which is CNEN News, Chemical and Engineering News. And she had a front page article. Well, I contacted her directly. These were just the beginning of email and the internet. And she sent me her actual manuscript. And what she had done was she had taken female rats, and she had put on the female rats, the back of female rats, what we call active ingredients of sunscreen. These are oxybenzone, avobenzone, methoxycinnamate, and and some of the salicylates, which are related to aspirin. And what happened was the female organs, the female rat's uterus, grew abnormally large. Well, that was the beginning of me looking at making sunscreens that were better and more effective, because I also was surfing and had just really started surfing at the time. And I had a young guy that I surfed with who was just barely 21, and he wound up getting melanoma. Like I would say, within the first year of us surfing together. Very blonde, very blue-eyed, very light-skinned, almost albino type, colored hair and skin. So that all happened at the same time, and I had been on a trip to Australia, Hawaii, and Japan. And in Australia, I learned they were using mineral sunscreens way before us. This is in the mid 90s. So that all happened. And then this study by Margaret Schlumpf on endocrine disruptors, and endocrine disruptors are female mimicking hormones. So female mimicking hormones are not good things, especially if you're a man surfer, but they're not good things, period. And about 5 years before Margaret Schlumpf's article, I had been up to Massachusetts at Harvard. Actually, there was an environmental studies symposium. It was the first international environmental studies symposium. It was 1998, I believe. And there was a woman there from UMass Amherst, which is where one of my degrees is from. And she was a toxicologist and an endocrinologist. And she was talking about things like trout or different male fish in the Potomac River laying eggs that were males. She was talking about hermaphroditic insects. And she was talking about endocrine disruptors also. So I already knew endocrine disruptors not probably a good thing, especially for men. They're not good for women either, because they're mimicking hormones. So when you start to change the balance of hormones in a person's body, or an animal's body for that matter, the results are not good, because then all of a sudden you talk about trans and sex changes for humans or mammals or whatever. I mean, when your hormone imbalance changes, you've got some issues. So I wanted to develop and patented a non-endocrine disrupting, cytoprotective, immuno-enhancing compound for sunscreen. Now that's a lot. So non-endocrine disrupting means no female mimicking hormones. That was number one. Number two was cytoprotective. Protect the skin cells from becoming precancerous. That's cytoprotectiveness. And immuno-enhancing, well, that's just proactiveness, right? How do you make the skin less susceptible to cancer? And the way you do that is you build the immune system. If your immune system's strong, you're probably not going to get COVID, and you're probably not going to get all these other diseases that are out there that are destroying our mankind, right? So that was the basis for this. And I did some more studying on endocrine disruptors and found out that the biggest endocrine disruptor on the planet is the pill. So, women taking the pill so they don't get pregnant, that winds up in the air and the water, and it's everywhere. And of course, there's more and more people on the planet every day, and there's more and more pills being taken every day by females who don't want to get pregnant. So that's the biggest one. Now, the second, probably in order, is something called soy. So soy contains something called genistein. And it doesn't matter if it's GMO soy. I've had some arguments recently with people said, oh, well, if it's non-GMO, which genetically modified organism soy, then it's not a problem. And I said, well, no, all soy has genistein, which is sort of like the kernel of soy. It's almost like saying that, GMO corn doesn't have a kernel. Well, it does. So the point being that genistein is a female mimicking hormone. It's a natural female mimicking hormone, but it still is one. And unfortunately, I've challenged a lot of people on the planet lately in the last 5 years, including my own family members, and I only have daughters, is try to go through a day or more without eating anything that has soy in it. If it's a packaged product, if it's something that is out of the grocery store, or a processed packaged product of food, chances are there's a high probability that there's soy in it somehow. So soy lecithin is a emulsifier. Well, we don't use soy lecithin to make our sunscreen, and we don't use soy lecithin in any products that I consume, but soy lecithin is everywhere. It's in cereals, it's in breads, it's in, you name it, any packaged goods, chocolates, it's amazing how many products have soy lecithin. Now, there are alternatives to soy lecithin, which is like, for example, sunflower lecithin, but it's more expensive and less commonly used. And I wondered, why is soy so prevalent? I said, I don't understand this. So I was at the ACS Green Chemistry meeting where I'm a member, and this was about 6 years ago. And I walked up to a booth, and the booth was the Soy Products Council booth. And the guys in the booth were older than me, looked like they came straight out of Iowa, which they did. And I said to them, I said, I just want to know about this genistein thing. And they looked at me like I had three heads. Well, at least two of the three guys did. The third guy said, I think I remember there was some woman that we sponsored who was getting her Ph.D. and she wrote a thesis about that. I said, well, I'd like to have a copy of that. And sure enough, he followed through and sent it to me. And sure enough, it was about what happens with soy in terms of ingestion if you're ingesting products with soy. And the answer is your estradiol, which is how they measure estrogenic materials in your body, your estradiol in your blood concentrations go up. Okay. So then that was, I'm going to say that was 5 years ago. I was in DC, and then I was at the Expo East conference in Baltimore, same year. And outside they had this Harvest Fest day, and they had food and drinks that they were offering from new companies, entrepreneurial companies. And I walked out there and I saw a chicken company, and they were selling organic chickens and, good chicken, right? And I walked up to one of the guys in the booth and I said, so I'm wondering, what do you do in terms of feeding chickens? I asked the Soy Council guys this question. I said, so why is soy so prevalent? And they said, well, it's a cheap feedstock, right? And and they told me the only animal that we consume that cannot digest soy are cows, because they actually can't digest soy and they die if they get soy. So that means like everything else, right? So I'm going, okay, so the chicken guys now, this is 4 or 5 months later. And I said to the guy in the booth, I said, excuse me. So I said, so why do you feed chicken soy? And he said, well, have you ever been on a chicken farm? I said, well, my dad was on an egg farm in Toms River, New Jersey. He says, yeah, that's chickens. He says, chickens eat a lot. And I said, okay, I get that. He goes, no. He says, you don't understand. A lot. I said, okay. He said, so to a chicken farmer, 1/4 cent a pound, 1/4 cent a pound is a big difference in cost. So we feed chicken soy. So then I started thinking, okay, so if chickens are eating soy, turkeys are eating soy, hogs are eating soy, and fish are eating soy if they're farm-fed fish. So I'm basically down now to fresh fish, assuming you can get it or catch it yourself, and beef, which hopefully is organic grass-fed beef, which doesn't have hormones in it. So anyway, it's been a long, interesting tale that probably will change how you look at eating things going forward, as I promised would happen before we did this interview.
Well, the thing for me is I always urge people to think about what they eat, what they think, how they take care of their body, and chiropractic being the catalyst for this. And, our show is called Chirohustle because, chiropractic has an overarching connection with eating right, thinking right, moving right, and the adjustment and the immune system and the nervous system, and all functionality goes through the spinal canal. And if there's a misalignment, a subluxation going on, then we're going to get lack of transference of information and nerve flow going to the organ system, the tissues, the glandular system, the muscles, the circulatory system. And there's just a downstream of effect. And then I tell people this all the time, Dr. Guerry, is you are what you eat. We've heard that for like probably past 20 years. But then I tell them you are what you eats.
That's right.
So you're just putting an exclamation mark after that comment that I make so regularly, that you aren't just what you eat, you are what you eats.
That's right. It's exactly right.
And we're eating what we think is a high level protein that is disrupting our natural status of hormone, which is in your language, endocrine system. And what that is testosterone and estrogen.
Exactly.
And that's the real future of balance of health. And I've interviewed at least 30 or 40 functional medicine doctors that say the first thing you should do is look at your blood work. And
100%.
and I call that blueprint medicine. Like
100%.
people should look at what's going on functionality from an x-ray perspective analysis. They should look at functionality from, like, we were talking about applied kinesiology earlier and what that looks like when you do muscle testing. You should do an orthopedic exam to find out if there's like range of motion issues and, tight, tough to turn and pain. You should find that stuff out before, contraindicators.
Yep.
But then you should look at a blood panel and look for like inflammation markers, and you should look for like where the body's healthy. But then I was like, yeah, there's this thing called applied kinesiology. And you were talking to me about this. And I go, and you could do muscle testing on somebody to find out if they're mineral deficient, to find out what's going on with like vitamins in their body, if they're like retaining things or if they're not. And you can like test them on muscles to find out where these holes in their health are.
Exactly.
But you're just qualifying all of this.
Absolutely.
So it's not just rhetoric and theory that I talk to people about this, that you should eat right, you should think right, you should move right, and you should get adjusted.
Exactly.
It's all real.
Exactly. So just so I know, I've got people banging up my phone here. How do we get to your live Facebook thing?
Go to James Chester's Facebook page. It's live over there.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this.
Yeah, let's talk about Third Rock too. If you guys want.
Well, it all goes together because you talked about something near and dear to my heart, which is muscle testing.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about muscle testing, because that's amazing. Okay.
But preemptively, I'm going to put in the chat your web address so people know where to go.
Oh, great. Thank you.
About your products.
Jim. Thanks, Jim. So muscle testing. So I was exposed to muscle testing the first time in my life in 1984 by John Schmidt, who is the brother of Wally Schmidt. Wally Schmidt, as we talked about, is internationally known, unfortunately now deceased, kinesiologist, chiropractor, and AKA guru, who wrote a book like 1,000 pages, which happens to have my sunscreen in it if anybody reads the book, but that's not the reason we're talking about this. So John Schmidt said to me, I understand that you want to make sunscreen. I want to help. I said, okay, John. I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring you all the components of the sunscreen and you're going to muscle test them. All of them. So I started out with old school people with old school products, because I'm not a formulator by training. I'm a polymer chemist. I did semiconductor microlithography. I do patent work and all those things you mentioned, but I was not a formulation chemist. And you don't get trained to be one. You really become one. So I got all these products and I started bringing them in little glass vials to John's office, and we would muscle test them together. Now, muscle testing is very interesting because it's a neuromuscular response. Anybody who's not tried it, anything that you taste or anything that you smell, the reason your nose is here and your mouth is here and your tongue is here and your brain is here is because within milliseconds, those senses will tell you if something might kill you. So there is a reason why your nose is here and your mouth is here and your brain is here, right? That's instantaneous. Nanoseconds, nanoseconds, like really fast, right? Speed of light. So because otherwise you might die. So the way muscle testing works, as you know, is a neuromuscular response. And once you taste or smell something, immediately your brain is going to tell you whether it weakens you, strengthens you, or has no effect. The only thing we found that had no effect was a Dow silicon oil, which was specifically formulated to be non-toxic. However, John's first or second patient was a guy named Dr. George Clark. Dr. George Clark, genius, lives in Durham, North Carolina, figured out how to determine if something was toxic or not to the cells using a bioluminescence test with, believe it or not, luciferase, which is the enzyme used by fireflies to light up. So it's a biological assay. So we took everything that John and I tested with muscle testing to George Clark's laboratory. And he tested all the components to determine down to 10 to the minus 16th power. 10 to the minus 16th is 0. Okay. You can't get 10 to the minus 16th with a chemical assay. You can get to about 10 to the minus 9th, maybe 10 to the minus 12th. You can't get to 10 to the minus 16th unless it's a bioassay. And what happened was all these cells died. And when the cells died, the light, the luminescence dims. Okay.
Well,
so we tested all of these substances. I published it in the Journal of Toxicology in 2005. Nobody read the study. And what it said was that we were the only, and then they took sunscreens off the shelves. And they tested my sunscreen against all the other sunscreens. They tested all these components of other people's sunscreens against their own stuff. And they found that they all were endocrine disruptors, and that the only thing that was not an endocrine disruptor was my product. Getting back to the Dow silicon oil, the Dow silicon oil was an endocrine disruptor at 10 to the minus 9th power. In other words, it had no effect in muscle testing that John could discernibly test on me, but it was slightly toxic.
wow.
Everything else that he tested on me made me weak. And what we did is we added rosemary and frankincense, because his third ever client, these are guys all older than me, hard to believe, his third ever client was a guy before Young Essential Oils was ever around, was a guy who carried around a case of essential oils. And he came one Saturday morning to John's office. We met together and we tested every essential oil combination we could think of. And every single person in the office that day, we had 4 or 5 people there, they all tested positive with the combination of rosemary and frankincense. Since that time, over 300 patients have been tested with rosemary and frankincense in my sunscreen, and they all muscle tested positive. That's where the immunoenhancing part of what I developed comes into.
You've made it to Chirohustle. Sit back and learn from the greatest influencers in the profession on the world's #1 chiropractic podcast. This episode is sponsored by Imaging Services, Chiro Health USA, Chiro Moguls, Pure Chiro Notes, Titronics, Sherman College of Chiropractic, New Patients in a Box, the Influencer Authority Podcast Training, Mango Voice, Community Healthcare Resources, Life Chiropractic College West. Let's hustle. You know, this is fascinating because there's this word that when we opened up our intro today, I say we support subluxation-based chiropractic. Sometimes people gloss over that, but sub is less, lux is disconnect and light, and ation is the disconnection of light and the spinal joint. And when you get a chiropractic adjustment, it detects, locates, and corrects vertebral subluxation. Right. So it's restoring light transformation through the spinal canal to have an impact on people's body to not need a pill, a potion, or a lotion to heal. And I think that it goes with the law of nature that the body doesn't need anything extra in it. It simply needs no interference. Yes. So when we use a disruptor, unbeknownst to us, just because it's a product that people can, spend their money on or be given even, it's free most of the time. Like, people give you stuff, and half the time we take it because we just think that we need it.
Right.
And that's the beautiful thing about chiropractic is it puts nothing into the body or removes anything. It just allows the body to reposition and heal. Exactly. And I think that when you talk about the parallel with the product that you created is it doesn't add anything extra into the body. It just simply allows the body to have homeostasis, which is the balance of health, without adding in something else that the body has to re-regulate for.
Correct. With one little caveat, and that is the sun. So does anybody need sunscreen? Actually, no, nobody needs sunscreen unless they're exposed for a longer period of time to the sun than the vitamin D that they need to absorb. So how does that work? Okay. Like you said, nobody needs really anything. The body can heal itself But in the presence of the sun, which is the biggest free radical generator on the planet, and if you surf or you run or you do something outside for more than, if you're Caucasian, 20 minutes, you're overexposed. Why is that? Well, in 20 minutes in direct sunlight, like we had here today, and you probably did in Colorado also, you have a lot of sun. 20 minutes, you get all the sun you need. You get all the sunlight you need because you get all the vitamin D you need. And vitamin D synthesis is way better than taking vitamin D as a supplement. We won't get into that, but vitamin D is also a hormone. It's not just a vitamin. So that gets back to our hormone imbalance issue that we talked about. So it turns out that when you get overexposed to the sun, it's not UVB that has the biggest concern, that you should have the biggest concern. UVB are the short, high energy rays that cause you to burn. Well, think about it. If in 20 minutes you or I, as Caucasians, start to burn in the presence of the sun, it's telling us what? It's saying, get the heck out of the sun. You're now becoming overexposed. You've gotten all the vitamin D you need. Your body's telling you that. You've gotten all the exposure you need. But as stubborn surfer people, we go out and we're out there in the water for not 20 minutes. We're out there for 2 hours or sometimes 4 hours.
And I'm a hiker. I'm a hiker, and I went hiking for 3.5 hours in Utah this past weekend.
So the question is, then what, right? So the answer is you need something to protect you from not UVB so much, because you might start to burn, but it's UVA, which are the long penetrating rays. They have a different wavelength. They penetrate deep into the skin, and they cause DNA damage, aging, wrinkling, and cell mutation, which can, if your immune system's not optimal, lead to skin cancer. And how many of us have optimal immune systems now after COVID? Who knows? So the point being that it's not UVB. Now, here's the sad news. So UVB is SPF, sun protection factor. So for you and me in the presence of the sun, if we want an SPF 30 product, and it's 30 times 20 minutes in the sun before you start to turn pink, that's 600 minutes of protection. That's 10 hours. Well, first of all, no sunscreen gives you 10 hours of protection from the sun. They're water-based. They evaporate. Two-thirds of it evaporates before you even get it on your skin and in your skin, because it's water-based. Number two, let's just say that you did get 10 hours of protection from UVB to turn red. Any toxic crap that you put on your skin that gives you SPF 30 is going to allow you not to burn maybe for several hours. However, what about UVA? So the FDA has it so upside down because you get this false sense of security that you're protected from UVB, from burning. However, you're still getting a huge dose of UVA. And if you've ever woken up sore the next day after your hike, not necessarily muscular soreness, but let's say skin soreness, what you're feeling is you're feeling that the cells themselves have divided. It's something called cell division or chain scission in the polymer world. And what's happened is you've got cell division going on, which literally is causing cell mutation. And if it's nerve cells, you're going to be sore. You're going to be sore all over. And it might not be because you hiked, Pikes Peak. It might be because you were just out in the mountains and getting a lot of sunlight, which felt good at the time, but the next morning you pay for it. And you might not even be that burnt, but because UVA is not necessarily going to cause burning, although it will, but it's going to change. It's going to change how your skin cells are. So that's my not only thesis, but we have proof of this, right? We make a product that is the most UVA protective sunscreen on the planet. It's not water-based. We patented the zinc oxide. So the zinc oxide is chelated with L-arginine, which is an amino acid. And what does that do? Well, it makes sure that basically what we've developed, without going into more science, is what the lifeguards put on their nose, which is pure zinc oxide, but we made it into a lotion. And I thought that would not be that hard to do, but that was 10 years before I figured out how to do it.
Well, Dr. Guerry, this is a fascinating episode of Chiro Hustle at 406. I know there's still a lot to talk about. You have a whole host of other products that you've engineered and developed. I never thought that I'd ever say trust the science. It's one of those phraseologies that we've been lambasted with over the past 2 years. But I do believe that at this juncture of this interview, we could trust the science, at least to your products.
Well, you have to be able to trust the scientist who says to trust the science. That's another whole interview right there. But I would say to you, we're science, not hype. And you know, the whole world tells you we have the best product for this. Our problem is nobody knows about us. Kinesiologists and chiropractors do to some extent. We do have a lot of them actually that buy our stuff and put it in their offices. But we also have the uphill battle of saying, hey, SPF doesn't mean that much. And they're like, well, wait a minute. If I have SPF 100, do I have to be worried? No. First of all, SPF 100 has been outlawed by the FDA. Anything over 50 now, they're saying is no longer allowed since the 2011 monograph, which, by the way, Neutrogena, which is owned by Johnson & Johnson, doesn't even obey. Coppertone, which is owned by Bayer now of Germany, doesn't obey. And Banana Boat, which is owned by Playtex, doesn't obey. And that's 80% of the sunscreen market. So if you go to Target, like I did this afternoon, to get some things for the house, you'll see a big display in the middle of Target, right in there. And there's all the sunscreen. And they're all toxic, and they all have female mimicking hormones. They all have endocrine disruptors in them. So the message is out there. EWG, Environmental Working Group, does rank sunscreens, as do a few websites that we work with some of these affiliate folks to get the word out. But, you know, unless you have kids, or you're super sensitive, or, you know, you're somebody who's a chiropractor, kinesiologist, or understands what they do like you do, it's a hard message to get out, because we've been bombarded by the fact that you got to put sunscreen on. But yet, if you live to be 65 in the United States, there's a 50-50 chance you'll get some form of skin cancer. So if people are using sunscreens and they're supposedly working, what's the deal here? It doesn't add up, right? So anyway, so that's how the company started. I make a lot of other products too now, but it all grew out of the sunscreen. It all grew out of trying to protect me and my buddies surfing, and obviously my family and friends, right? Because if you're out for more than 20 minutes in direct sunlight, you're overexposed in most cases. And, you know, I took one of my friends, we went to school together. He played football at Duke. He's an African American, and he went down to Costa Rica with me. We went surfing, and he said to me, "So what's the secret of the surfing thing?" And I said to him, "Really, the secret is don't drown." And then the bad news was I didn't give him any sunscreen. So he woke up the next morning, and his whole back, instead of being, you know, dark brown, was what's the right color? Mahogany red. And he said, I've never experienced anything like this before, because he grew up in D.C., Washington, D.C. So from that point on, he used sunscreen.
And when you get more down near the equator, the sun hits you different.
Yeah, if you've been, you know, it's a whole different sun down there. Well, and that's the other thing I tell people, you know, this whole started as I said, in the early 90s. And I went to Australia, and in those days, they had the ozone hole they were talking about over Australia. And the Australians were like, every day on the radio, you'd hear two things: what the water pollution was, levels were, because everybody lives on the coast in Australia. They have 12 million people. They all live on the coast, like 90%, because you can't live inland. It's a desert. And the other thing we're talking about is the sun factor. And so, you know, there was no question that they had high incidence of skin cancer, because they all lived on the coast. And Australians, you know, are pretty outgoing, at least outdoorsy people. And so, you know, a lot of this started back then, and the ozone hole was right over Australia. And so when they found that out, they said, well, you know, that's weird. So it's not even the same atmosphere that we used to have anymore, right? The Earth's atmosphere is different than it was when our parents or grandparents or earlier ancestors were alive on the planet. Maybe that's another reason for skin cancer. Maybe it's not. But the answer for me has been, let's have a proactive product that you can put on your skin that really, really, really works. And of course, if I ever said that this was something that would allow to make sure that you never get skin cancer, well, the FDA would put me in jail. In fact, you'll love this. I went to CVS. I don't care if I tell people that I did this. And it was in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. That's their headquarters. And I went there about 10 years ago with the guy that I was developing the sunscreen with at the time. He was up in Maine, had a facility in Maine where it was OTC. OTC, by the way, is what do you call it? OTC is over the counter. And it's a drug. It's a drug. It has to be so the FDA considers sunscreen a drug because it has to be made in an over-the-counter facility. So we were developing it. We went to CVS because he said, CVS is going to love this. Well, they did love it. They said, can you put on the label that it says, stops skin cancer? And I said, well, I can't put that on the label. I said, if you guys want to put that on the label, that's totally up to you. But I'm not putting it on the label. And they said, well, why not? I said, are you serious? Do you know what the FDA would do if you put that on the label? And that was more than 10 years ago. So yeah, so that's the society we live in, right? You can't say prevents skin cancer. You can't say anything like that. Even if it does, you can get the American Dermatology Association label on your product. I tried that 10 years ago. They wanted $10,000 then. just for a seal that says ADA approved. Right.
Well, Dr. Guerry, this has been a fascinating conversation today about Third Rock Essentials. I put the website in the chat thread there. Third Rock Essentials is with the 3 and RD and the word rock, essentials.com. Love this conversation. I think we should schedule a part 2 and talk about the other products that you have out there in the market so more people have access to the knowledge that you've created products from. And just want to say thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thanks for having me, Jim. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry we don't have more time, and I look forward to our next podcast.
Yeah, so I'm going to tell everybody good night here from Chirohustle, and you guys are just one story away. Keep hustling. And Dr. Guerry, we will get you on in the next episode before I leave for Alaska in August. That's great. Great. You have a great rest of the night and enjoy Colorado. All right. Bye for now. See you, Jim. Bye. Bye. Thanks for listening to Chirohustle. Don't forget to subscribe and check back next week to continue hustling.